Stop doing the things that you know are wrong that you could stop doing. Right? So it's a fairly limited attempt. First of all, we're not going to say that you know what the good is or what the truth is in any ultimate sense. But we will presume that there are things that you're doing that for one reason or another you know are not in your best interests. There's something about them that you just know you should stop. They're kind of self-evident to you. Other things you're going to be doubtful about. You're not going to know which way is up and which way is down. But there are things that you're doing that you know you shouldn't do. Now, some of those you won't stop doing for whatever reason. You don't have the discipline, or maybe there's a secondary payoff, or you don't believe it's necessary, or it's too much of a sacrifice, or you're angry or resentful or afraid. Who knows? So forget about those for now. But there's another subset that you could stop doing. It might be a little thing. Well, that's fine. Stop doing it and see what happens.
Easter 2024. You can probably hear the Bambino crying in the background. How Easterly is that? Honestly, we've heard so many mixed things about this holiday since we were little that we aren't quite sure what to believe, though we are fairly comfortable in the biblical meaning of, well, at least that's not true. We're fairly comfortable in the present version of the biblical meaning of Easter. It is the ultimate resurrection. It's the ultimate recovery story, and recovery is discovery is recovery. Here's a few blips and blurbs that may or may not be relevant.
In light of your affirmation of the archetypal significance of the resurrection, you have expressed some ambivalence about its historical reality. J.R.R. Tolkien had long conversations in Oxford with C.S. Lewis, in which Tolkien helped Lewis to understand that the story of Christ was the first archetypal myth that is not just true in a mythopoetic and psychological sense, but also true in the historical sense. That insight, helped by the grace of God, pushed Lewis over and he became a Christian. Where are you in this discernment process on the historical nature of Christ, and especially the resurrection?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I do believe that there are places where the mythological and the literal touch. Mm-hmm. I mentioned one of those earlier, the idea that spoken truth, logos, creates habitable order out of chaos. I think that is literally and metaphorically true. I don't think you can state the nature of being and the role that consciousness plays in it more accurately than that. And so it's metaphysically true, it's religiously true, and it's literally true all at the same time. And so there are times when that happens, and I don't know. See, this is the mystery to me, I would say. I understand what that means. I understand that there are times when the literal and the metaphysical or religious co-occur. And I can understand
so that the literal is the foundation upon which the symbolic or the psychological...
Yeah, it's like the way I've been conceptualizing it is, it's as if the material reaches up towards the spiritual and the spiritual reaches down towards the material, and now and then they touch. And that's a miracle when that happens. Mm-hmm. It's a miracle when that happens. And I do think that happens. With regards to the resurrection, apart from saying what I just said, I would say that I need to think about that for about 3 more years before I would even venture an answer beyond what I've already given. Mm-hmm. Because there's very much there that I don't understand as well as I need to understand. Part of the reason, I did a biblical series last year, and I got through Genesis. I thought I would get farther than that, but that isn't what happened, and I'm going to do Exodus next, and I'm going to walk through the biblical stories, and I hope I can get through all of them, although I don't know if I'll live long enough to do that. But I want to spend the same amount of energy on the story of the Christian passion as I have with those other lectures, mm-hmm. to investigate exactly this sort of thing, mm-hmm. because I know there's way more to that story that is available for analysis that I don't understand. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand what it means symbolically. I understand what the dying and resurrecting God means. It means something like you pick up your cross, you voluntarily accept your suffering, you open yourself humbly to the correction of the world, parts of you continually die as a consequence. All the parts of you that need to be updated by exposure to truth and wisdom. And it's painful. You have to identify with the part of you that can be reborn continually through those micro deaths. Okay, so that's the archetypal pattern. Well, the Christian claim is there's something going on that transcends that mere archetypal pattern, or that it manifested itself in reality ultimately once. You know, and that was a claim that Carl Jung was actually quite, what would you say, sympathetic to. But I don't know enough about it to say anything more than what I've said psychologically.
Yeah.
And so I want to know more about it. The thing is the deeper you go into biology, the more it shades into something that appears to be religious, because you start analyzing the fundamental structure of the psyche itself. And it becomes something, well, it becomes something with a power that transcends your ability to resist it. So, okay, so you can think about Christ from a psychological perspective, and the critic, my critic, this particular critic that I've been reading, said, well, that doesn't differentiate Christ much from a whole sequence of dying and resurrecting mythological gods. And of course, people have made that claim in comparative religion. Joseph Campbell did that, and Jung to a lesser degree, I would say, but Campbell did that. But the difference, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out as well, the difference between those mythological gods and Christ was that there's a representation of, there's a historical representation of his existence as well. Now, you can debate whether or not that's genuine. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter in some sense, because this, well, it does, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief, and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. You know, that's Jungian synchronicity. Yeah. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. You know, we have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world. But the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, in principle, is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to... that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. It's too... partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it.
If you believed in the story of Christ, or if you believed that history and let's say the narrative meet, let's
both,
say.
I think you, because when you believe that, you buy both those stories. You believe that the narrative and the objective can actually touch.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot write a more tragic story. It's impossible, technically. Why? Well, because it's a story of the aggregation of everything that people are afraid of. You see death, you see destruction, pain, terror, tyranny, frailty, betrayal. Look harder. Look harder. Look harder. What do you see? The death and resurrection. You look far enough into the abyss, you see the light. Here's a doctrine from all fields of psychotherapy.
Okay.
Look at what you're terrified of, and you will get braver. So the classic therapeutic treatment for terror and the poisoning that terror induces is exposure, voluntary exposure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the pattern there is face face what you're most afraid of, and
Right.
you will be free.
Okay.
Okay,
That makes sense.
voluntarily.
Yeah.
Now that's a doctrine of psychotherapy now. You cannot write a more tragic story. It's impossible, technically. Why? Well, because it's a story of the aggregation of everything that people are afraid of. So there was no death more painful than crucifixion. That's why the Romans invented it. It was to punish political miscreants. It was the slow, agonizing death by suffocation, essentially, and dehydration and exposure. It's extraordinarily painful. Okay, so that sucks. That's pain, man. Plus, you know it's coming. That's part of the story. Plus, your best friend betrayed you into it. Plus, your people turned against you. Plus, they're led by a tyrant who doubts truth. Plus, you're a victim of the Roman Empire. Plus, you're completely innocent. Plus, everybody knows it. Plus, they choose a criminal to be released from this experience instead of you, even though they know he's a criminal and they know you're innocent. So, and you're young. And you've done no wrong, and all you've done is help people. So it's a limit story. Okay, so then you think, we've been looking at that limit story for 2,000 years in the image and in the story. What are we doing? Well, you're supposed to visit the stations of the cross, let's say. Okay, here's the idea. You hear the crucifixion story, and you play with it. Who are you? Maybe if you're female, you're Mary, and why is that? It's the Pieta. Because you have to offer your children to the destruction of the world. That's female courage. That's the mother that doesn't hold her child back. It's like, go out. To what? Eventually your death and destruction. Go out. Leave me. Be in the world. That's feminine courage, man, to let her baby go. You're Pilate. You doubt truth. But you'll go along with the crowd. You're Judas because you betray your best friend. You're the mob. You're the criminal. All of that, that's you. You look on all those things that you hate and are terrified by. That's not a snake. It's like the worst of all possible snakes everywhere. That's what you're looking at. And what do you see? You see death, you see destruction, pain, terror, tyranny, frailty, betrayal. Look harder. Look harder. Look harder. What do you see? The death and resurrection. You look far enough into the abyss, you see the light. The central Christian doctrine is pick up your cross and follow me. Take your preoccupation with suffering seriously. It's a serious business. That's that willingness to gaze into the abyss. It's gazing into the abyss that makes you better. Sometimes your gaze can be forcefully directed towards the abyss, and then you're traumatized. If it's involuntary and accidental, it can kill you. The more it's voluntary, the more transformative it is. And that's part of that idea about facing death and hell. It's like, can you tolerate death and hell? And I'm speaking not in religious terms saying that. I'm just speaking as a psychologist. It's like one of the things we've learned in the last 100 years is voluntary exposure to that which freezes and terrifies you in measured proportions is curative.